Hello! In this hour of B-roll footage and monotone droning, I will expand on concepts discussed in Part 1, primarily seeking to outline the practical application of the systems described, and provide some comparisons between the equipment and tactics of the Soviet Airborne Forces and those who sought to oppose them. I will also highlight some of the limitations and advantages presented by this uniquely Soviet system. I hope that you enjoy the video.
Плечом земля, держите парашюты. Мы знаем притяжение закон, но в этот миг решающей минуты не власти над десантом даже он. Не страшно меж землею быть и небом, не страшно под огнем идти вперед. Страх, когда друг, с кем ты делился хлебом, упав на землю, в небо уплывет. Никто, кроме нас, голубые береты, пробил наш час. Родина, где ты? Небо над нами, под нами бой. Родина — это то, что с тобой. С неба теплой голубые береты, пробил наш час. Родина, где ты? Небо над нами, все вместе и в бой. Родина — это то, что с тобой. Родина — это то, что с тобой.
The mechanization of the Soviet Airborne Forces allowed for quite a lot of independence within enemy depth. The ability to establish a highly mobile rear service capable of transporting large quantities of supplies considerable distances, provide heavy, long-range radio systems to each unit, and cross water obstacles without additional assistance was unrivaled at this time. Compared to light infantry, who are primarily foot mobile, a mechanized airborne force can land farther from their objective and still reach the target with enough haste to ensure surprise is achieved. Deliberate attacks, raids, ambushes, and defensive positions become increasingly deadly with the integration of airborne IFVs and artillery systems. Night combat is considerably easier, as each vehicle can assist in finding and engaging targets. The anti-aircraft capabilities of a mechanized airborne force are similar to those of a motorized rifle unit at the tactical level, which is favorable when one considers the extremely limited anti-aircraft capabilities of a light infantry unit. The ability to reliably defeat armored targets, such as APCs, IFVs, and tanks, is of great importance when operating within the rear of the enemy. This issue is difficult to solve, as ATGMs are exceedingly heavy and are difficult to transport long distances on foot. Mechanization solves this complication by providing vehicles that can use them independently of attached infantry. Due to the fact that a mechanized airborne unit carries all of its sustainability with it, these formations can fight for longer periods and will not suffer fatigue anywhere near that of a light infantry unit. Mechanized airborne transportation vectors protect their crews from chemical weapons, can conduct chemical reconnaissance as well as decontamination, and therefore can be used in recently nuked terrain. While these advantages are not to be ignored, they come with unique disadvantages that are important to consider. Due to the exponential increase in mechanization experience within the Soviet Airborne Forces throughout the Cold War, The ability to deliver Su-85 or BMD-equipped units was an ever-present concern. As an example, it would require 110 IL-76s to deliver a BMD-equipped regiment. The solution to this issue was a wide array of aircraft, each occupying a unique lift requirement. While these aircraft did have the disadvantage of varying speeds, altitudes, and ranges, this was indeed the most effective solution. In wartime, it was expected that the VTA's lift capability would be augmented by Aeroflot, which possessed many AN-12s and IL-76s. These aircraft were regularly involved in airborne exercises to simulate this capability. It is also possible that the massive volume of Aeroflot's medium and long-range passenger aircraft would see integration. Employing civilian aircraft to deliver airborne forces would allow for a significant degree of surprise to be actualized if done in isolation. Because of the large volume of aircraft needed to deliver a BMD-equipped unit, the period in which such a drop could be conducted is limited. The airborne forces would be restricted to a surprise attack in the first few hours of a war in Europe, or a situation where temporary air superiority was achieved. In regards to surprise, in an ideal world, the enemy will not be expecting an attack at all, though this is unrealistic. So the Soviets instead focus on ensuring the enemy is unaware of when the offensive is to transpire. The enemy is not likely to be shocked when the attack comes, but he may be surprised as to the exact moment it begins, and therefore he will be disadvantaged. In regards to a conflict in Europe, the Soviets believe that against a coalition such as NATO, the ability to surprise certain members is exceedingly important. If any given ally is unprepared, it will leave fatal gaps in a defensive line which are to be exploited. In this more realistic situation, the airborne forces may be able to make many successful deployments. It is important to note that the target of this deception is not military leaders, but instead political officials, as they decide on key matters such as mobilization. At this level, Soviet surprise manifests within the manipulation of tense political situations. It is important the enemy does not see the Soviet Union as an immediate threat, nor believe itself to be in a situation that could incite war. If the enemy believes they may provoke an attack, they will not be properly surprised. Soviet leaders believe that striking prior to the peak of a political crisis is imperative for this reason. Surprise may begin at the political and military level, but it transcends these realms and penetrates civil action as well. The entire nation must be involved in the act of deception and disinformation, or surprise will be impossible. At the operational level, commanders will work to ensure the defender is unaware of where exactly the attack will occur. Measures to ensure the enemy cannot scramble are impossible to achieve due to modern hardware preventing such actions. Therefore, the Soviets must deceive the enemy into establishing itself along the wrong axis or preparing for the wrong kind of threat. All of these factors are important when considering the possibility of limited airborne operations within the strategic rear of NATO. Further applications that transcend conventional deep operations include the immediate occupation and exploitation of areas hit by nuclear strikes, as well as counterattacks to diminish the capabilities of a defensive force are possible. The vulnerability of a mechanized airborne force during insertion is high. During the fly-in and drop, air attacks would likely inflict significant casualties on these formations before they reach the ground. Once a successful landing has occurred, the speed at which a mechanized airborne force can regroup is slightly diminished when compared to light infantry, as more equipment is involved in any one deployment. The first 45 minutes of a landing are seen as the deadliest time for the airborne forces, as even a numerically inferior enemy can destroy the unit in pieces as they work to prepare air defense and anti-tank weapons. As a result, the prospect of landing paratroopers with their equipment was subject to significant consideration. This was successfully implemented through the Centaur, later Reactor landing systems present on the BMD-1 and BMD-2. A multitude of failed designs preceded this, many of which attempted to employ the Kazbek-D landing seats initially developed for the Soyuz descent module. While airborne forces will initially have a large reserve of logistical support, once this runs out, the volume of supplies required by such a formation is exponentially higher than that of a light infantry unit. It must be noted that despite this, a light infantry unit will have just as much trouble receiving supplies as a mechanized one. Here, the primary concern is not the volume needed, but the ability to deliver it at all. Here, the integration of a mechanized rear service becomes vital, as supplies can be delivered at considerable distances from the main body without complication. Generally speaking, if these units are capable of landing, regrouping, and receiving minimal or satisfactory supplies, a mechanized airborne force is tactically as well as operationally more capable than any light infantry contemporary. The late 1960s and early 1970s marked the beginning of a renaissance in airborne development. During this time, the VDV received systems such as the BMD-1, D-30 122mm howitzer, AGS-17 grenade launcher, 9M111 anti-tank missile, and the BM-21V multiple rocket launcher. These innovations, of course, could not exist without a considerable amount of research and development being directed towards landing platforms and parachutes. At this time, the future of the Airborne Forces was still uncertain, and as a result, a myriad of unique proposals were still subject to consideration. Notably the development of landing systems that would facilitate the airborne deployment of PT-76, BTR-PB, BMP-1, and 2S-1. Following the introduction of the highly successful PP-128-5000, a new landing system for AN-22, which would become P-134, was already in development. P-134 would be a unified system that allowed for various loads to be deployed from a single platform. 14 P-134 was the lightest of the three variants, with a maximum capacity of 7 tons, followed by 2 P-134, which could deliver 12 tons of equipment. The heaviest of the bunch was 4 P-134, which could comfortably support 16 tons. Between 1968 and 1969, 4 P-134 would be tested alongside the experimental PS-9404-63R parachute system, and the VPS-117-82-68 extraction system. At this time, the 2 P-131 automatic release system was also being trialed. The P-134 series would consist of a steel frame featuring longitudinal beams that allowed the platform to slide into AN-22's cargo hold, 2 nets for securing cargo, and a massive foam pad to cushion the landing of heavy equipment. On average, it took about 1 hour and 15 minutes to load the P-134 series platform into an AN-22. 4 P-134 would enter service under the designation P-16 in 1972, with its express purpose being the transportation of BMP-1 and 2S-1. Interestingly, the 2S-1 passed state trials and was fit to enter airborne service, but was rejected for unknown reasons. PP-128-5000 would be replaced by the 14 P-134, designated P-7, in 1973, and would serve as the primary system for landing lighter vehicles in conjunction with the MKS-5-128M multi-dome parachute system. The MKS-5-128M allowed for a maximum deployment altitude of 8,000 meters. P-7 would differ from P-16 in its aluminum frame. To deploy its shock absorbers, P-7 included valves that captured air during the platform's descent. Upon impact, this air would rapidly release from these valves and cushion the landing even at high speeds. After the introduction of IL-76, the P-7 and P-16 platforms would be improved, receiving the designations P-7M and P-16M. The improved P-7 platform would support 11 tons and would make use of the recently introduced MKS-5-128R parachute system. As the airborne forces grew, their need for heavier equipment, such as the Su-85, decreased, and as a result, the P-16 series of platforms would be removed from service, making P-7 the VDV's primary landing system. The first successful application of these recently introduced technologies was at the 1970 Combined Arms exercise conducted in Belarus, known as Dvina. Here, 7,000 paratroopers and 150 heavy elements were deployed in just 22 minutes. It was here that Margalov first suggested the deployment of BMD-1s with a limited crew inside of them, which led to the application of the Kazbek-D shock-absorbing seats and the development of the Centaur landing system that I discussed last video. While these platforms were in development, the parachute jet system, or PRS, that would define the airborne forces in the latter half of the Cold War was underway. This technology was designed alongside the BMD-1, and received the designation PRS-915 due to its close relationship with Object 915. This solution offered many advantages. Not only did it reduce the weight of the platform and its instruments, but it turned out to be far cheaper when compared to conventional landing practices. The PRS was also more reliable than standard multi-dome parachutes due to the fewer moving parts involved in the deployment process. PRS 915 would successfully pass state trials in 1970, and see adoption between 1972 and 1973. After its introduction, PRS 915 was immediately modified to feature an improved suspension system, which further stabilized the BMD-1 in flight and increased its reliability. After the adoption of IL-76, the increased space provided within the cargo hold allowed for the equipment present on PRS-915 to be reorganized, increasing the ergonomics of loading BMD-1 into the aircraft and checking it before it was dropped. This variant, dubbed PRSM-915, would enter service in 1976, alongside an improved parachute that no longer had the unfortunate side effect of tearing as a result of high descent speeds. Initially, the PRSM-915 was to be a modular system that could land equipment with weights between 4 and 20 tons, but this did not see further consideration. PRSM-915 had a service life of up to 7 years, and could be collected after a successful deployment. But this number was ultimately extended after tests were conducted in 1984, where systems produced in 1972 were used multiple times without complication. With the introduction of BTRD, 2S9, and 1V119, PRSM-925, I know, very creative name, would enter service to support the modified hulls of these vehicles. A similar modification was designed to support BMD-2, which had an increased weight of around 8 tons. This incorporated design solutions employed in both PRSM-915 and PRSM-925, and wait for it, this name is going to blow your mind, it was called the PRSM-916. In regards to armament, the M55-1 and BMD-1 are difficult to effectively compare, and present challenges unique to their respective designs. This comparison is important, as these are the only truly airborne vehicles designed for direct confrontation within their respective militaries. BMD-1 has a clear disadvantage when speaking to the volume of missiles offered to each vehicle. Prior to receiving the more advanced 9M111 and 9M113, of which 3 were carried, BMD-1 carried 4 9M14 missiles, 2 of which were placed on a ready rack within the turret. The other 2 missiles were located in the troop compartment. Loading these missiles was rather easy, and did not force the gunner to expose himself to enemy fire. To do this, the gun is placed at a 30-degree angle, which allows the gunner to access the launch rail. Here the 9M14 is mounted, the fins are deployed, and the missile is ready to fire. The location of the ready racks are convenient, and allow the gunner to engage these actions from his seat. To prepare the 9M14 for firing, a 50 to 55 second period is expected, which includes preparing associated elements like the guidance equipment. It is possible for an exceptionally competent gunner to engage this process in just 40 seconds. This is a rather long period, which could prove problematic in combat conditions, but is offset by the ability for BMD-1 to exploit reverse slopes via the use of its hydropneumatic suspension, and exceedingly small size. An additional advantage presented by this configuration is found in the event of an ambush, where the BMD-1 can quickly re-engage the enemy with its main gun after a missile has been expended. In the first 2 minutes of an engagement, a gunner is expected to be capable of achieving 2 successful loading, launching, and guiding cycles, before replenishing the ready rack. If the BMD-1 is employed in a prepared defensive position, 3 missiles within the first 2 minutes is possible, if the turret is turned to the left as to allow the gunner to access his reserve ammunition. The speed in which one can load 9M111 and 9M113, later supplied to BMD-1 and BMD-2, is similar when compared to the prior figures. The issue presented with this upgrade was that the gunner had to expose himself when loading the missile. The M55-1 carries 8 missiles, some sources state 10 were carried, but this depends on the variant, which is significantly more than the BMD-1. Due to the gun-launch nature of these missiles, exposing oneself to enemy fire was not a possibility. This came with its own disadvantages, though. Due to the extremely cramped turret and frequent failures experienced with the electronic breach caused by the 10 removable separate circuit boards present within the turret being shook from their beds by the violent recoil of the gun, the loader frequently found himself operating a manual crank before loading the 27-kilogram missiles. This left him exhausted, and diminished his ability to perform his role in high-stress situations. Despite this, the M55-1 still maintained an advantage in loading speed over the BMD-1, with a reduced re-engagement capability. This is because the HE and heat rounds, upon being fired, resulted in a rather violent recoil that had the unfortunate consequence of generating a great deal of dust and smoke, which could interfere with the MGM-51's guidance system, rendering it momentarily inoperable. This compounded on a reported mean time before failure of about 50 shots. The BMD-1P and BMD-2, despite carrying less missiles than the M55-1, provide exponentially greater capabilities in this regard. The minimum range of MGM-51 is 730 meters, which is exceedingly long. This was due to the unfortunate layout of the tank. This is problematic as it severely limits the range in which the missile can be employed, especially in the context of a meeting engagement, and significantly reduces the time in which the gunner can correct the missile along its trajectory. Early variants, such as the MGM-51A, had a rather short range of around 2,000 meters. This was resolved via the introduction of MGM-51B and C, which extended the range to 3,000 meters. Due to the use of thrust vectoring, the missile experiences reduced steering responsiveness once its engine burns out. MGM-51 penetrates 150 millimeters of RHA at 60 degrees, and 600 millimeters at 0 degrees. The minimum firing range of 9M111 is just 70 meters, and provides superb engagement capabilities against fast-moving targets at speeds of 60 kilometers per hour, beyond 300 meters. The maneuverability of both Milan and TOW do not surpass 9M111, which is exceedingly impressive considering Milan is a thrust vectoring system, like MGM-51, known for being rather responsive. While MGM-51 is slightly faster than 9M111, at 323 meters per second, with 9M111 having around 200 meters per second, it has roughly comparable range. 9M111 has a maximum engagement range of 2,000 meters. This was later extended to 2,500 meters with the introduction of 9M111M. 9N122 is a relatively small warhead, just 1.76 kilograms when compared with the 6.8 kilogram shaped charge of MGM-51, but still manages to penetrate 200 millimeters at 60 degrees. For both of these missiles, this is likely higher, as the technical penetration depth of missiles tends to be lower than the average depth. 9N122M, found on 9M111, is a larger and heavier warhead, which provides an additional 30 millimeters of penetration. 9M111 would later be replaced on BMD-1 and 2 with the 9M113, which offered 3,000 meters of range. Due to the 9M113 seeking to replicate the impressive characteristics of 9M111, its aerodynamic and steering characteristics are identical, with the only difference in flight performance being improved speed, with around 960 meters per second. 9M113's warhead, being 9N131, has a technical penetration of 250 millimeters of RHA at 60 degrees, but secondary sources state that this figure is inaccurate and the realistic penetration depth expected from 9M113 is 560 millimeters. The 152mm M657 high-explosive tracer employed by M55-1 is obviously superior to the 73mm OG-15V employed by BMD-1 when used against fortifications and personnel. This round is exceedingly sensitive and cannot be fired through brush or other obstructions, which can limit its application. Furthermore, the highly flammable cartridge cases are vulnerable once the barrier bag has been removed, and can be ignited easily. This round has a maximum range of 9,000 meters and a muzzle velocity of 682 meters per second when used to deliver indirect fire. The preferred ammunition for anti-personnel is the M625 canister round, which is extremely effective in dense foliage. This munition employs 10,000 steel flechettes loaded in 5 separate bays that are secured by a closing cup crimped over the forward end of the body. OG-15V employed by BMD-1P is a subsonic high-explosive fragmentation round, with a 1,600 meter maximum range, and a muzzle velocity of 290 meters per second. This round provides excellent fragmentation, and has a rather high explosive mass relative to its caliber. While this round does provide limited anti-armor capabilities, and later saw the introduction of an increased incendiary effect through OG-15VM, it was nothing compared to the aforementioned rounds. While these details are important, one could also argue that OG-15V was the more practical round for the vehicle's expected application. OG-15V was much easier to load, which increased the rate of fire significantly, was smaller and therefore more could be carried, was more accurate against priority targets, and could be used in closer proximity to friendly infantry. One could also argue that the 2A28 is the more practical gun, as it features a nigh non-existent recoil stroke of just 150 millimeters and has a barrel life of 1,250 rounds. This is favorable when one compares the M81 of the M55-1, which was found to have a barrel life of only 100 rounds in testing. This was later raised to 200 rounds after the missile key and tube key weight were modified. It is also important to consider the fact that upon firing its main gun, M55-1's front road wheels are momentarily thrown into the air by the violent recoil. The muzzle blast is so great that all crew members were urged to stay inside the vehicle when a conventional round is fired to avoid injury. M55-1's conventional anti-tank round, M409 Heat, penetrates 355 millimeters of RHA, and has a maximum range of 1,600 meters as defined by the gunnery manual. Secondary sources are inconclusive on this range. Past 800 meters, it is stated that MGM-51 is the preferred ammunition. This could be a result of limited accuracy at this distance. PG-15V has a very similar muzzle velocity when compared to M409 at 665 meters per second. 680 meters per second for M409. And a similar penetration at 326 millimeters. The fire control system of BMD-1, like BMP-1, offers the shooter a reliable chance of first-round impact against armored targets at up to 800 meters. The probability of destroying an APC with the 2A28 from 500 meters is roughly 80% in the first 2 rounds, Against a stationary tank at 500 meters, the percentile is 70%. Though at 800 meters, the chances degrade to 50%. At 200 meters, the PG-7V is capable of hitting a tank with a roughly 90% chance of impact, cementing the vehicle's role as an ambush weapon. The primary advantage M55-1 has in this regard is its gun stabilization and laser rangefinder, which BMD-1 lacks. The M55-1 has more favorable conditions for the commander, which diminishes the workload expected of the gunner. This is indeed important, but it is offset by the BMD-1's dismounts providing visibility and coordinating with the gunner. BMD-1 employed the 1PN22 combined day-night sight, which featured fixed magnification of up to 6 times in regards to the day channel. The night channel features a 6.7 times magnification and a field of view of 6 degrees. At night, BMD-1 could identify a tank up to 400 meters in favorable conditions, which is still within the range in which 9M111 and 9M113 can engage targets. While information on the exact range of M44 night vision periscope is sparse, it's stated that the optic could only be employed with conventional ammunition, meaning the Sheridan could not fire its missiles at night. While M55-1 has slightly thicker armor than BMD-1, BMD-1's upper glacis is angled more aggressively, and employs ABT-101, which is harder than 7039 found on M55-1. ABT-101 is 45% as effective as steel and has a BHN of 145, 12 more than 7039. This gives it the ability to resist 23mm BZT at ranges beyond 500 meters. Against the most likely threats both vehicles are likely to encounter, BMD-1 and M55-1 are both well protected and immune to 12.7mm AP. What makes BMD-1 more survivable when compared to M55-1 is its size. BMD-1 is 1.9 meters tall and can reduce its height to 1.5 meters via the use of its suspension, while M55-1 is 2.9 meters tall. Interestingly, while BMD-1 and M55-1 are similarly protected, M55-1 is 7.7 tons heavier, which is 0.2 tons heavier than 2 BMDs stacked on top of each other. This significantly reduces the cross-country capabilities of M55-1 in comparison, and means the vehicle must be prepared before limited amphibious actions are engaged. Because no water jets are provided to M55-1, it swims at a speed of 4 to 6 kilometers per hour. The BMD-1 swims at 8 kilometers per hour. Of course, the amphibious capabilities of M55-1 in an airborne context are significantly less important, as the infantry they are supporting cannot follow them across rivers. A unit employing BMD-1 will have no issue fording water obstacles of any width, as infantry can ride within these vehicles and dismount upon reaching the other side. M55-1 does not provide any sustainability to infantry, nor does it protect them from chemical weapons. This would be acceptable if there was some other transportation vector, but there really isn't, outside of Humvees and other unarmored systems. The airborne capabilities of M55-1 are inferior when compared to BMD-1. The crew must land separately, and the vehicle remains in the air for a considerable period of time, which increases the speed in which the enemy can determine where the landing will be regrouping. The low-altitude parachute extraction system is preferred to this method, but has the added disadvantage of requiring a prepared landing area that is controlled by friendly forces. The Soviet Airborne Forces actually experimented with such a system, and determined that in parachute operations such a capability is impractical, as well as rather dangerous. Due to the extreme weight of M55-1, it cannot be transported by helicopter, and therefore its use case is further restricted. BMD-1 also provides air defense through the inclusion of a Manpads launcher stored inside the dismount compartment, while M55-1 has to use its 50 cal. Operations involving the Airborne Forces are often planned and executed by the TVD, and seek to engage assets of both theater and frontal importance. The primary objectives of the Airborne Forces include the destruction of nuclear deliverance systems and their command elements, the seizure of bridges alongside associated crossings of extreme value, the destruction of higher-level command and control facilities, including political installations, the seizure of anti-aircraft systems, the destruction of reinforcement points such as airfields as well as ports, taking out key industrial facilities such as power stations, oil refineries, military production facilities, and storage depots, and lastly, the capture of important transportation junctions. Units will seek to deploy 150 to 300 kilometers behind the enemy. The depth of the mission is directly tied to the size of the force required. Shallow operations could be engaged by a battalion or even a company, but objects of strategic importance may require a regiment. Some sources state that 100 kilometers behind the enemy is cause for the application of a regiment, but this is highly inconclusive. Divisional assets such as artillery batteries, engineer companies, and reconnaissance elements will be attached to augment the capabilities of these units depending on the mission. No matter the objective, raiding detachments are the primary element employed by the VDV in pursuit of its aims. These units can take the shape of a company or battalion, and as a rule are mounted in BMDs. The purpose of raiding detachments is to cause as much chaos as possible while seeking to destroy the unified target of the unit they are attached to. The mobility of these units is extreme, which improves their ability to engage the enemy on their terms. 24 hours before a drop is to transpire, special long-range reconnaissance units will be deployed, which will seek to triangulate communication posts, objects of importance, and threats that could diminish the likelihood of a parachute operation succeeding. If possible, air defense weapons 20 kilometers from the route are to be suppressed, though this may not be possible. In this case, local air superiority is to be temporarily achieved. This will allow radars, air defense weapons, and airfields 200 kilometers from the line of contact to be suppressed. Drops are to take place at night, usually a few hours before dawn in pursuit of surprise and concealment. Aircraft will depart from separate airfields and move to create a coherent formation shortly before leaving friendly airspace. This will significantly reduce the effectiveness of nuclear attacks. Airfields will not house more than one VTA regiment for this reason. Airborne operations will depart from 100 kilometers within friendly territory to avoid medium-range missiles and air attacks destroying airborne formations on the ground. Depending on the level of readiness present, these units can deploy within 5 to 8 hours. 16 main and 4 to 6 reserve airfields are required to facilitate an operation. Airborne formations are not to remain at an airfield for more than 24 hours when preparing to deploy, and will move between bases at night. The fly-in will be conducted at the lowest possible altitude, with a great deal of top cover provided by air superiority fighters, fighter bombers, and electronic warfare aircraft, as well as aircraft designed to suppress enemy air defenses. Chaff trails will be deployed to potentially confuse the enemy as to the true size of the formation. Similar electronic warfare and suppression attacks will be conducted on non-essential axes to confuse the enemy on where the attack will transpire. Individuals and personnel of extreme importance will be dispersed across a multitude of aircraft. Ideally, a security element will land and secure a drop zone. In this case, regiments will employ 3 drop zones and battalions only 1. In extreme cases, a regiment can land at just 2 drop zones. A regimental drop zone is likely to be 6 by 1 kilometers in size, 2,500 by 500 meters for a battalion. In daylight conditions, a unit can deploy in 25 minutes. This increases to an hour at night. In this case, 2 ingress routes will be employed. Regimental drop zones will be placed 5 to 15 kilometers from one another, with each battalion separated by 5 kilometers. Despite the integration of artillery, airborne IFVs, and a considerable volume of SHORAD, the lack of heavier fire support restricts the airborne forces to maneuvers that champion stealth as well as surprise. The mechanized capabilities of the airborne forces shine in defensive positions established around recently seized terrain as well as installations, and rapid attacks on unprepared enemy forces. BMD-equipped troops also function in decentralized ambushes, where they can level their firepower and mobility to disorient larger formations. A unique capability present within the Soviet airborne forces is their ability to conduct true mechanized combined arms operations in the rear of the enemy, while still preserving the capability for decentralized raids. These maneuvers begin with the unit landing and eventually regrouping. Following this, groups, usually a platoon to battalion in size, depending on the scale of the operation, break off and begin to engage in tasks detached from the main body. Here, command and control are divided along these units. Eventually, as the mission develops, these forces will recombine into a centralized formation, and pursue a common goal. Night conditions are considered ideal, as the airborne forces can stealthily reposition and avoid meeting engagements. Due to the equipment employed by the airborne forces, the tactics demonstrated by BMD and BTRD mounted formations are exceedingly similar to those of conventional mechanized forces, from the battalion to platoon level when under fire, with the primary differences between the two being present in the length of engagements these units can withstand and the types of engagements they will pursue. Many of the locations in which the VDV will seek to capture are to be destroyed. Airfields, for example, are to be disabled by engineers before an immediate exfiltration from the area. When industrial assets are disabled, energy and water supplies, fuel depots, raw materials, and finished products are destroyed. The airborne forces cannot succeed in any of their aims if they are not supported by comprehensive logistical and technical reserves, with material as well as medical support being the most difficult to manage. Battalion and company commanders are personally responsible for leveraging their staff and capabilities to ensure that this support is delivered in a timely fashion, as the inability of units to receive missiles, ammunition, fuel, food, and other material resources will destroy their functionality. As a result, a battalion commander monitors the consumption of material using automated systems, and his staff to establish a realistic picture of the logistical situation. He must report to the regimental commander on the readiness, supply, and consumption of these resources if he is operating as a part of a larger formation. He will also draft reports on the condition of armored vehicles, the sick, and the wounded. The individuals involved in this process include the Deputy Battalion Commander for Technical Support of Landing Equipment, the Deputy Battalion Commander for Airborne Training, the Deputy Battalion Commander for Technical Support of Communications, the Chief of Communications of the battalion, and the battalion medical staff. At the company level, the airborne training instructor, senior technician, and sanitary instructor. A technical observation post will usually be deployed, which serves to track supplies present within individual units, alongside a repair/maintenance point for armored vehicles, a field kitchen to supplement dry rations, a ration supply point, and a medical station. A rationing system will be drawn up at the beginning of an operation, which will be modified as the mission progresses to meet the availability of material within the battalion. Supplies are broken into two categories following an airborne landing. These are expendable supplies, which encompass most combat provisions, and reserve supplies, which are not to be employed for any means outside of specifically supervised application. Items in this realm include fuel, lubricants, and other supplies that cannot be easily replenished. In urgent cases, reserve supplies may be consumed, but only with the permission of the battalion commander. If a vehicle is damaged, it is to be repaired at its immediate position if possible, and if it cannot be evacuated, it will be destroyed to avoid capture. Once a unit has landed, supplies are to be regrouped and organized under the regiment or battalion. A depot is established, which is operated by the material support staff of the regiment or battalion. As a rule, hot food is to be prepared and served 3 times a day at these locations. In certain circumstances, hot food twice a day with the provision of dry rations is considered satisfactory. In a worst-case scenario, dry rations can be eaten cold for 3 meals a day, at the expense of individual comforts. Water is provided on a similar schedule, but must first be examined by the sanitary and medical service of the battalion to avoid an unfavorable epidemiological situation. When supplies are delivered to a unit, the rear services of the battalion or regiment are sent to collect them and bring them to established supply points. Missiles and ammunition are delivered from these points directly to units engaged in combat. If this is not possible, ammunition will be delivered at the closest possible point to minimize the period in which vehicles and personnel spend outside of combat. Medical attention is provided to units in combat by evacuating them on mechanized ambulances and bringing them to established field hospitals. If this cannot be done, they will be attended to within a mechanized vehicle. At the divisional and regimental level, the Chief of the Rear, who is a deputy commander, and logistics staff officer, coordinates all logistical planning and controls transportation. The Deputy Commander for Armament controls technical support actions. To ensure the Chief of the Rear is informed of the situation at the front so that he may properly adjust plans and so on, systems are in place to ensure he receives reports every 12 hours on fuel and ammunition states, and another report every 24 hours on other materials. He must monitor the operations net and maintain constant communications with his subordinates. He must monitor troop movements and make regular appearances before his subordinates, or have members of his staff do so in his place. While maneuver units are preparing their plans, the Chief of the Rear, the Artillery Supply Officer, and the Chief of Petroleum, Oils, and Lubricants Supply attend combat briefings. As these events transpire, the Rear Commander and his deputies prepare proposals for logistical support using calculation tables. The Chief of the Rear will issue proposals as the formation commanders issue orders. Once these are each approved by the overall commander, companies are then submitted to subordinate formations so that the rear services may be briefed. There is no set organization for these units, as the size and scale of the formation is often determined with each mission and the requirements they will need to meet. Though more often than not, the divisional rear carries 5 days of supply, 3 days being held at unit level and 2 days held at divisional level. These units are highly mobile and only operate material support maintenance and medical battalions. In practice, combat formations are capable of consuming their mobile reserves until proper supply lines can be re-established. This is done through what is known as skip echelon resupply, which calls for bypassing the next higher formation and delivering directly to subunits. This is exceedingly similar to motorized formations. This is a massive advantage presented within a mechanized airborne force. A functional rear service can be established to supply such a formation and ensure greater autonomy. A considerable threat to the airborne forces was helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft. The solution to this is abundant SHORAD, which is for good reason in great excess within these units. In regards to organic support, each regiment operates a minimum of 27 9K32 or 9K38, depending on mission requirements. Specifically, the exclusion of 9K31, a greater number will see operation, up to 54, and an attached air defense battery consisting of 6 ZU-23-2 alongside a platoon of 9K31. These were not air deployable and would only see use in an air landing. In practice, there is at least one 9K32 or 9K38 attached to each group of vehicles. In a situation where 9K31 is not present, it is possible that every other vehicle will carry 9K32 or 9K38. Dedicated manpads operators, as a part of a anti-aircraft missile battery, are usually tasked with covering tactical command posts and enveloping platoons. ZU-23-2, which is capable of being attached to a BTRD for mobile support, defends the unit's main body during a march. Every two battalions often have a battery between them. When attacking, these units will deploy to advantageous positions or attach directly to attacking battalions depending on the mission. While the Airborne Forces lacked the insurmountable anti-aircraft protection afforded to conventional formations, the threats they were likely to encounter called for a greater reliance on short-range weapons. Studies conducted by Soviet military academies aimed at both the Vietnam War and World War II discovered that pilots are likely to expend their munitions well before they have entered their effective range when under fire. It was also found that traditional anti-aircraft artillery forces the height at which such attacks are flown to be raised significantly, which in the age of the missile is invaluable to the defending party. When observing proxy conflicts, the presence of resistance, even if numerically insignificant, was enough to degrade the efficacy of air attacks, and engagement via missiles severely degraded the cohesion of attacking pilots. This was further demonstrated in the Middle East, where it was observed that Israeli pilots were frequently routed by relatively weak air defense in the form of anti-aircraft machine guns atop armored vehicles. For these reasons, the anti-aircraft capabilities of the Airborne Forces should not be disregarded.
Although now only one of several effective anti-aircraft weapons, the ZU-23 should be regarded as a potent threat to Army aircrews. The ZU-23's tactical anti-aircraft range is 2,500 meters. Cyclic rate of fire is 1,600 to 2,000 rounds per minute per system. At 500 meters, penetration of rolled homogeneous armor is 24 millimeters. At 1,000 meters, penetration is 19 millimeters. By exploding within the fuselage, one ZU-23 round can inflict severe damage to your aircraft's internal structure. In addition to its high rate of fire, the ZU-23 is air transportable and can be dropped by parachute. It is now the basic air defense weapon employed by Soviet airborne divisions.
To best exploit short-range air defense weapons, masking terrain is to see liberal application in the establishment of anti-aircraft ambushes. These terrain features will also decrease the effective range of some air-launched munitions, forcing enemy aircraft to close within range of the aforementioned systems. To supplement the lack of radars to detect incoming air attacks, round-robin visual reconnaissance is established throughout each unit. This method of surveillance is conducted through observation sectors where conventional optics are employed in 360-degree search networks. Each sector will overlap by 20 to 30 degrees. In ideal circumstances, the aircraft will be detected 2 to 2.5 kilometers before it reaches the unit. With the introduction of the BMD-2, the anti-aircraft capabilities of the Airborne Forces increased significantly. The BMD-2 includes a dedicated anti-aircraft site known as the PZU-8, which is effective against targets traveling at 300 meters per second, at altitudes of 2,000 meters, and a range of 2,500 meters. This range increases to 3,000 meters against helicopters. The 2A-42's high rate of fire and 3U OR-6 fragmentation tracer rounds facilitate this. Usually one 3U OR-6 is mixed into a burst of 3U OF-8 high-explosive incendiary OFC rounds. 3U OF-8's incendiary effect increases its effectiveness against air targets. In an anti-aircraft role, 30mm OFC is generally more efficient when compared to 23mm OFC, with only 1.4 hits being required to guarantee a shoot-down. This is favorable when considering 3 hits are required to bring an aircraft down using 23mm OFC. Against larger aircraft, 23mm OFC was found to require 6 impacts, which is rather inefficient when compared to the 2.8 hits required when using 30mm OFC. The range in which BMD-2's gunner can correct his fire against an airborne target is identical to that of ZU-23-2. To supplement 2A-42, PKT is also employed against airborne targets out to 2,000 meters. When engaging aircraft with the BMD-2, the gunner aims ahead of the aircraft and fires a barrage, as it is described in the manual, for 3 to 4 seconds. Each individual within the BMD-2, who is capable of doing so, especially the squad machine gunner, is to deliver 1 magazine worth of ammunition in the direction of the aircraft to increase the likelihood of striking the target. Small arms fire should not be engaged until the target is within 500 meters of the unit. When firing at enemy rotary wing aircraft, it is not unlikely that 9M111 and 9M113 will see use against such systems, as they possess the range and speed to target these threats when they are hovering. BMD-2's 2E36-1 stabilizer possesses a unique semi-automatic mode of operation, which is to be used when firing at enemy aircraft. This is activated automatically once the gun has elevated past 35 degrees, after which it begins to interface with the PZU-8 anti-aircraft sight. In semi-automatic mode, 2E36-1 loses some of its precision, but gains a great deal of speed, which facilitates tracking fast-moving targets. In automatic mode, the stabilizer permits a full turret rotation in 12 seconds, while in semi-automatic mode, this decreases to just 10 seconds. In semi-automatic mode, the elevation speed decreases significantly, which ensures accurate adjustments can be made by the gunner against a maneuvering aircraft. An airborne battalion would be tasked with defending a frontage of up to 5 kilometers with a depth of 3 kilometers. This front may widen significantly if the battalion has erected its defensive positions in difficult terrain that would decrease the capabilities of the attacking party. A battalion defense is made up of company strongpoints, connected by a network of anti-tank missiles and machine guns. The gaps between these positions are on average 1,500 meters long. Platoons will be separated by 300 meters each across this system. If this position is established outside of combat conditions, a reinforced platoon will occupy a position 2 kilometers from the main body. Their primary efforts will consist of disrupting reconnaissance activities and warning the main body of an impending attack. If the battalion is operating as a part of a regiment, a second battalion will prepare for a counterattack to exploit a successful defense. This reserve is capable of supplementing the defending party, if they need to, and will be briefed on positions they must occupy in the event that the first echelon suffers unacceptable casualties. BMD-1, ZU-23-2, and other systems capable of providing fire support are located in advantageous positions that allow for the exploitation of reverse slopes. These units will be placed 200 meters from one another, and will vary in their depth depending on the role of the system. Kill zones where anti-tank weapons can exploit the sides of armored vehicles will be established before an engagement. The maximum range of these systems will be taken into account before a defense is established. To ensure they can exploit their range against the enemy, continuous fire from anti-tank weapons is ensured by the leapfrogging of missiles. One operator fires and guides his missile while his neighbor reloads and does the same. It is possible that a roving contingent of BMD-1s will be established to harass the enemy. This will ensure that the primary base of fire is difficult to locate. Within platoon strongpoints, BMD-1s are dispersed by 150 meters per fighting position. Tanks and IFVs are to be destroyed first, followed by APCs and infantry. It is possible that 2S9 and Su-85 will accompany BMD-1s in anti-armor ambushes. The capacity for BMD-1P to erect extremely effective ambushes is high, as their missiles, 9M113 and 111, are situated well above their gun. Because of this, a skilled crew can make use of the vehicle's hydropneumatic suspension to conceal the vehicle, leaving all but the ATGM above a reverse slope. This means that engagement via the BMD-1P's missile can be quickly followed up by a shot from the 2A28. All by raising the height of the system above the ridge long enough to engage the already damaged target, before returning to a concealed position. Areas that allow for this to be effectively executed will be located on the flanks of a likely attack. Air defense weapons will be located between each defensive position. Reserve air defense weapons will be located in depth along the probable route of exfil that enemy aircraft will employ following an attack. The transition between an effective defense to a counterattack will be rehearsed and conceptualized before an engagement. After engaging the enemy, missile systems, anti-aircraft weapons, and machine gunners are to rapidly shift their positions to ensure that priority targets are difficult to pinpoint. Due to the high mobility of the airborne forces, it is possible for a defending force to rapidly move to flank the enemy if they manage to actualize a breakthrough. In an event where the defending force has been encircled by a superior enemy force, a circular defense will be established before a hasty exfiltration under the cover of night. A breakthrough must accompany this endeavor, and as a result, the battalion will seek to mount a surprise attack on the encircling force to potentially form a momentary gap, which would facilitate the unit's escape. At night, units occupy secondary fighting positions closer to the line of contact, but as dawn breaks, they are encouraged to return to their daylight posts. Cities are an ideal location for an airborne battalion to establish a potent defensive position. In this case, a platoon will occupy up to 2 buildings, and the unit will work to spread itself evenly throughout 2 or 3 blocks. Buildings are to be fortified with whatever elements are available to the airborne forces, such as bags of soil, foliage, bricks, and other improvised solutions. BMD-1s will be situated within the first floors of occupied structures, where they will be camouflaged, or across long streets where they can make use of their guided missiles. If the battalion has time to prepare a defensive position, BMD-1s will be holed down in fighting positions behind stone or brick fences. Anti-aircraft systems are placed atop roofs alongside observation posts. The average airborne division is rather small, being only 6,900 strong. This is easy to critique externally, considering the massive size of international contemporaries like the 82nd Airborne Division. But this would be a mistake, as the airborne forces were more akin to an understrength motorized rifle division than a conventional airborne formation. The difference in manpower is not a result of diminished squad sizes or anything of the sort, but the lack of a tank regiment, anti-aircraft missile regiment, independent tank battalion, independent anti-tank artillery battalion, independent chemical defense battalion, tanks within infantry regiments, and an independent helicopter detachment. This is accurately reflected at the tactical level, where squad sizes are in many regards identical to those found in conventional motorized rifle formations. The average BMD-1 mounted squad is comprised of a radio operator, armed with an AKS-74, a machine gunner armed with an RPKS-74, a grenadier armed with an RPG-16 or RPG-7 depending on the year, a senior rifleman armed with an AKS-74, and a rifleman armed with an AKS-74. Like motorized rifle platoons, a marksman is present and will accompany one squad in the unit. Each airborne division had 3 parachute regiments, an artillery regiment, an independent anti-aircraft battalion, an independent self-propelled artillery battalion, an independent reconnaissance company, an independent communication company, an independent engineering battalion, an air landing security battalion, an independent material support battalion, an independent equipment maintenance and recovery battalion, and an independent medical battalion. Each parachute regiment comprised 84 BMD-1s, with an additional 6 in the reconnaissance company, 12 BMD-1Ks plus 1 in the reconnaissance company, 12 BTRDs plus 1 in the reconnaissance company, 6 120mm mortars, 12 9M111s, 6 ZU-23-2s, and the previously discussed abundance of manpads. The primary element employed by the airborne forces for raiding and associated actions is the company. A parachute company totals 79 personnel, including 6 officers, 2 ensigns, 11 sergeants, and 60 soldiers. There are 9 BMD-1s, 1 BTRD, 1 BMD-1K within each company, alongside 44 RPG-18/22s, 30 9M111s, 81 rounds for the 3 RPG-16s, 295 F1 fragmentation grenades, and 75 RGD-5 fragmentation grenades.
Уложили парашюты, завтра едем на прыжки, но не спится почему-то, хоть и нет в душе тоски. Страха тут же нет в помине, мы ведь все-таки десант, и желание не остынет сердцу рваться в небеса. Казарму родный тихо вошел, поправил одеяло чуть кому-то. Ему-то что? Ему-то хорошо. Он может прыгать и без парашюта. Ему-то что? Ему-то хорошо. Он может прыгать и без парашюта. Разлинованы тельняшки в облачно-небесный цвет. Не профаны в рукопашке, лихоносим свой берет. Дисциплиной нежно дружим, самоволка нам зарез. Из холодного оружия обожаем стропорез. А если в бой, тогда, братва, держись. Для нас отчизна не пустое слово, и десантура — это наша жизнь. Ее за друга мы отдать готовы. И десантура — это наша жизнь. ее за друга мы отдать готовы. Заработали моторы, на посадку дан приказ. Поутихли разговоры, поскучай, земля без нас. Скоро мы к тебе прибудем, белой стаей куполов. С ВДВ нам, знаете, люди, очень даже повезло. Уже совсем немного до прыжка, нас ждет свои объятия небо синее. И если есть десантные войска, то это значит, будет и Россия.